Hello, everybody. How you doing today? This is Saucony Prince of SauconyPrince.com, where we make motivation personal by introducing you to yourself. And I want to welcome you to the H.E.A.L podcast. H.E.A.L is an acronym for Help, Elevate, and Learn, and it's based on my best-selling book by the same name. The subtitle is It's a Guide to Healing Your Inner Child. And I can't tell you how excited I am because today I have a treat for you, and I can't wait to get our guests up on the screen. But before we do that, we do want to thank our sponsor, none other than BetterHelp. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who is trained to listen and give you helpful, unbiased advice. First, you go to their site. You can use my link, betterhelp.com/SauconyPrinceHeal. You answer a few questions, and BetterHelp will match you to a professional who's had years of experience helping people with struggles just like yours. You can do it all from your phone or your computer, via a phone call, a video chat, or messaging. However you feel most comfortable. It is the easiest possible way to start talking to a therapist. You'll be matched to a therapist usually within 48 hours, so you can get started fast. Let BetterHelp connect you to a therapist who can support you, all from the comfort of your own home. Visit betterhelp.com/SauconyPrinceHeal or choose Saucony Prince Heal during your sign up and enjoy a special discount on your first month. And again, we want to thank BetterHelp for being a sponsor of this podcast because like we oftentimes said, this podcast is meant to not end the conversation, but start the conversation. The conversation around inner child wounds, inner child trauma, but more importantly, inner child healing. And the guest I have today, I can't tell you how excited I am because I know that they're going to share some information that's going to help all of us get to a better place and a better space in life. I want to welcome my guest today, Ron and Tasha Anthony. Can you hear me, guys?
Yes, sir.
Yes, we can.
Good. Well, listen, I want you to take a minute and just introduce yourself to our audience.
Well, my name is Ron Anthony. I'm originally from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I've been out in the Texas area for about 22 years. Currently, I'm an elementary school principal. I've been in public education for 22 years, and I absolutely love what I do. I love building positive relationships with kids and just being a leader for our staff.
Okay. Miss Tasha?
I'm Tasha Anthony. I am Ron's wife of 21 years. I am an elementary assistant principal in North Texas ISD here in Dallas, Texas. I'm also from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Like I said, we've been here about 21 years. We have 3 kids, one in college, a freshman in high school, and we have a 9-year-old daughter. And so we have seen all walks of the education spectrum. And so we're excited to be here and just talk about this important conversation about healing and elevating and just learning from our past. So thanks for having us.
You're so welcome. And I do want to take a moment to applaud both of you for taking up that huge mantle of responsibility that comes from educating our children, because I know it's not easy and I know it's a challenge and I know it's hard, but you have to have a heart for that. And I want to applaud you for doing that because, I mean, honestly, my hat goes off to you. I have 5 kids and I can't imagine having to deal with a whole bunch of other ones, in fact, let alone my own. So thank you again. Well, listen, I want to take a minute to actually talk about my first question is in your professional or personal opinion, how important is inner child healing?
Well, I think that aspect of inner child healing is very important from the standpoint of we can't serve out the purpose that God has for our lives until we heal on the inside. Each of us are equipped with a skill set that he's placed in us. And I think we have to deal with the hurt and the pain first before we can, and I'll use your terminology from your introduction, in order for us to elevate, we have to deal with that inner child healing first.
That's true.
Yeah, just to kind of piggyback off Ron said, I think that being able to tap into that emotional well-being of what's happening on the inside is a key part to starting the healing process. But I often tell people, as I talk to parents, as I talk to students, and even my staff, identifying what those wounds are first is the first step to healing. And until we address unchecked or unresolved issues and wounds, the healing process can't stop. And so I think that part of that comes from understanding that we repeat patterns that stem from our childhood pain if we do not address them. And so we deal with that every day on a campus when we are meeting with students, when we're meeting with teachers. Even like so much people think, gosh, the work happens with the child, but the work happens in that classroom or basically in the parking lot. When that teacher pulls up, he or she is carrying something. And so being able to identify that thing first before they even walk into our buildings is where that healing starts.
That is so, so true. And you know what? Again, you two are both in a unique position because you can do a lot of weeding with the young people that you have now. In fact, my book was really targeted towards adults and those individuals who may have been triggered by something from their past. But you have an opportunity and you have a skill set to where you can actually kind of help identify and help steer people and help pick weeds out before things kind of go off the rails. So again, I think that you two are in an amazing position to help future generations. So thank you. So, in your professional opinion, when should someone start this type of work? And when should someone start inner child work?
I think ideally someone should start inner child work the moment they recognize that there are some patterns of emotional behavior. There's some patterns of some wounds that you're connecting and you're in relationship with people and you're identifying, this triggered me. The moment that you start to identify that when you're in a relationship with someone, whether that is as a child, I'm noticing in a classroom that something that a student has said, something simple may have set me off. That is the time for us as educators to start having those conversations with the child, but also with parents to address, hey, I noticed this about this child. That's where the conversation should start. However, it doesn't always start that way. It doesn't typically start at home because sometimes as parents, we don't even know our children are going through things. So it starts, those conversations honestly probably start in your adolescent years when you're an adult, you're on a job or you're in a relationship for the first time and you're navigating things and you're noticing something's off about you, something's not right. So while I don't think there's a right age to start, I absolutely think that once we start identifying, hey, this is a trigger for me, that's when you need to start asking those questions. Where is this coming from? And digging deeper to see where that comes from.
Ron, you have a take on that?
And I think another aspect would be how powerful would it be if we can help kids, let's say at the foundational elementary level, begin to identify that trauma, and then we give them the skill set to deal with it. So when we get those kids at the secondary and the middle school and the high school level, they already have a skill set to deal with it, and then they can possibly partner with a classmate who may be going, through a situation. So I think the earlier we can start, I think it could be a game changer.
Right, definitely. And that's one of the reasons why, like I said, I just want to raise our awareness about, the things that may have traumatized us and hopefully put us in a better position to where we can help the next generation coming behind us to help them to have a certain level of emotional intelligence. I had, in fact, one of my guests on here, and he shared with the audience about how when you're a child, you don't necessarily know how to articulate what you're going through. You don't have the words and the vocabulary to actually say, this is abandonment, or this is trauma, or this is hurting me, or this is going to leave a scar or a wound. The only thing you know is you don't like it. But it's not until you become an adult that you can really articulate your feelings and your emotions. But that doesn't mean that they aren't there even as a child. So helping our children to even think in this vein, even understand that they need to be not just physically, we don't just need PE, we need our emotional intelligence actually worked on as well. So yeah, as soon as we identify, as soon as we see something, and most of the time it is a trigger that triggers a trauma, but as soon as we identify, I honestly believe that it's the best time for us to start that process and start that work. So now this one here is going to be, and I'm going to ask this kind of in two stages. It's the same questions, but I'm going to ask it from the principal and the assistant principal standpoint. In fact, when it comes to our youth and our children, but then I also want to ask it in reference to your relationship as a couple. So first of all, the question is, how does trauma show up in life and in relationships?
I guess I'll start there. I think that trauma starts and it manifests itself in several different ways when you think about in life. So I think about the students that I support. Oftentimes in a classroom, trauma can start off in anger. You find a child who has got to school and we're standing at the door, we're greeting the child, teachers are excited, they're good morning, Mr. Anthony, how are you today? And already Mr. Anthony has thrown his backpack to the side, sat in the desk and put his head down. And you're thinking, goodness, the day hadn't even started. However, you're angry, you see a child coming with big emotions. The first thing that you want to do is give that child some space because you don't know what has happened. And so oftentimes in the classroom, we are ready to get our day started. In our schools, we do something called social emotional learning, which is at the top of the day with our kids. And so that oftentimes gives students an opportunity to either share, write down, or sometimes just sit quietly before they get the day started. And why that's important is because you don't know what happened that morning. Ron and I try to set a really mellow tone for our kids before school because the moment they wake up until they get in that car and they get into that classroom, it sets the tone for the rest of the day. And so being able to tap into those children's emotions when they first walk into the classroom, I think is huge. It can come from anger in a situation that happened in the car. It could come from defensiveness. Someone said something on the bus or someone said something, they were standing outside, and you don't always know where that anger or that issue is coming from. So giving them space and time at the start of the day, I think is really key. When I think about that in relationships, as it relates to like just marriage or just relationships in general, and trauma manifesting itself, sometimes it comes from control. I know Ron and I, we've both done individual therapy, but we've also had couples therapy. And so we have dealt a lot with a lot of time in times in my background and experience. I was raised by a single grandmother. So if you can imagine, very independent, raised to be extremely independent. And so you bring all of that independence into marriage where I'm controlling the narrative. I'm saying like what I'm doing, what I'm supposed to be doing. At 16, I was paying my own car insurance. And so I've been doing things by myself for a very long time. And so I brought that into marriage. And so allowing Ron to take the lead and say where the money was going and be a part of the budget. I'm like, what you talking about, sir? What you talking about? Because those were, but part of that was my control and and part of my baggage and my trauma where I wasn't used to a man leading me or in my home. And so it can manifest itself in so many ways where you have control issues, you have trust issues. And I carried a lot of that growing up without my mom. My mom was murdered when I was 3 years old. And so there was always a sense of abandonment, a sense of loss that I could not articulate because, again, I was 3 years old. And as a child, we didn't necessarily talk about it. And so I carried a lot of control. I'm going to control the narrative. I'm going to control the conversation because those were my tools and that's what I could protect.
Ron?
If I address the portion of how does trauma show up in life, I'll give you a good example that just happened this past week in a school setting. And I think it shows up in the school setting when situations on campus mirror the original trauma. And let me break it down. If you have a situation where a parent uses a negative tone, they're yelling at the kid, and the kid's natural response is to yell back. If you put him in a classroom setting and the teacher uses that same tone as mom or dad, 9 times out of 10, that kid is going to give that same response. And I was working with a young man this past Tuesday, and a similar situation to where the teacher kind of raised her voice at the student, and the student's natural reaction based on his trauma was to yell back. Now, in her mind, okay, this kid is being disrespectful, I'm gonna send him down to the office. But when he got there, I said, you know what, let me dig a little bit deeper and have a deeper conversation on why do you yell back when you were being addressed by an adult in that tone? And he was able to break it down. He said, Mr. Anthony, in my household, we do a lot of yelling. You know, I know it's disrespectful to yell back to my mom, but when she yells at me, I yell back at her. So I think when we look at trauma showing up in life, especially in a school setting, sometimes, unfortunately, adults in the school setting, we recreate that trauma that the kids see at home every day. And we have to do a better job of creating that safe space to where home and school looks a little different when it comes to trauma.
So true. Listen, we have a comment from YouTube here, and this Miss Woodard. She says, "So excited to hear these two stellar individuals speak." So Definitely glad to have her tuning in on that aspect as well.
We're excited
So
to see her.
yes, yes. And I guess I also want to go back because Ron, I know you addressed it, well, when it comes to, like kids and, in fact, work environment. But in fact, what about other relationships?
I definitely say it shows up at home, and I'll piggyback off of the marriage example that Tasha started. Uh,
Hmm.
we both come from situations. I come from a two-parent home. She came from a single-parent home. And I tell anybody, marriage is probably the hardest thing that I've ever experienced. Probably from that standpoint, you got two different people, two different environments trying to come together and mesh, and then you add
Right.
kids into that factor, and it definitely makes it a interesting dynamic. But I think the key thing was that I had to realize to where the trauma that she's facing, I had to step back and say, how can I be strong where she's weak? And then vice versa, in order for us to help the trauma. But one of the key things I think that helped us was the individual counseling that we did receive. And then we were
Right.
able to take those skill sets that were given to us by the counselor, mesh it together, and not saying things are perfect, but we are in a more healthier space to deal with the trauma that we bring from our individual situations.
Well, and again, I just can't. If I had one of those sound machines that like when they say applause and you hit it and people start clapping, I, I would be hitting it because I mean, honestly, I want to commend you both for doing your individuals as well as your couples therapy. Because it's so important to work on yourself so you can be the best version of yourself for yourself and for your spouse. It's not just I'm doing this just for you. I'm doing this for me too.
Absolutely.
So So with that being said, our next question is, what do you believe is the biggest obstacles when it comes to inner child healing?
The word pride comes to mind. I think there's a portion of us as human beings that want to be perfect, and when you think about inner child healing, that's almost like a strike against us, and we want to cover it up and hide it. And I'll speak from the perspective of a man. For me to kind of show those weaknesses from that trauma, oftentimes it can make you feel less of a man, and I'm more willing to not communicate with my wife or not communicate with another brother on, hey, here's where I am at this moment, based
Right.
on something that happened in childhood. And I think just us as men have to do a better job of being able to express ourselves to other men or even our spouses.
Yeah.
Right. That's true.
I think I'll take it coming from a different view. I think that, and not just from women, but just from in my work that I do daily, but just I support other women and in friendships and relationships. I think the biggest obstacle for us when it deals with healing is really that shame and avoidance. So often, especially in the Black community, talking about trauma and healing is it's not what we do. It's
Right.
not a conversation that we're comfortable with having. Oftentimes, it can also be looked at as a weakness, or it's just a sign of weakness to even share and talk about just your trauma or what you've been through. But then it also can be looked at as disloyalty, because in a family where what's in our house stays in our house, and
Yeah.
you're telling our business and you're sharing it with other people, that shame and that avoidance oftentimes brings itself up. So where you feel like, I'm going to keep this to myself. We don't share this with the world. And so I think that identifying those wounds and saying, where am I in this space where I can be open and transparent and tell my story? Because so many times we keep our mama's story or we keep our grandmother's story because we're protecting other people. But what happens is those wounds and that trauma becomes your story as well. And you have every right to tell that story, because telling that story heals your husband, it heals your marriage, it heals your children, and then it heals the community around you. And so I think keeping those secrets, not being able to open up and share, is where we stay stuck in that inner child. And so it's having those hard conversations and not staying in that shame place.
So true. Actually, in fact, my wife is on and she says, I love having a view from a married couple. Thanks. So
Hi,
true.
thank
So
you.
now, and piggybacking off of what you said, I remember posting, and this was several months ago. I said, the bravest thing that you can do is heal from your hurt.
Mhm.
The bravest thing you can do is heal from your hurt, because it takes a level of depth to actually deal with that. And there was another young lady who actually said, actually it was Kathy Barton Brown, Dr. Kathy Barton Brown, back when she was on our show. She mentioned that wherever the trauma happens, you stop maturing in that area at that age.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, absolutely.
I remember watching this movie called Central Intelligence, and I don't know if you've seen it or not, but it has, Dwayne Rock Johnson and Kevin Hart in it. And it also has Jason Bateman. At the beginning of the movie, they were in high school, and Jason Bateman's character and some friends took Dwayne Johnson's character, who was a chubby boy, fat boy. He was in the shower, and he was doing an assembly. They took him and they threw him out in the middle of the assembly, naked, completely naked. Well, later on in the movie, he was actually, he was The Rock. He was big, he was buff, but they ran into Jason Bateman again, and he went back to that child. They even showed his reflection in the glass. He saw himself as that teenage boy in high school. And I thought, how profound is that? Because so many people, when they're triggered, when their trauma shows up, they go back to that age, to that place where the trauma happens. And so I just think that we need to do a collectively better job in allowing people an opportunity to have those safe spaces, to be able to actually talk about this in a non-judgmental environment so that they can get the help they need.
Agreed. Absolutely.
So my next question is, and this is because I normally actually see therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists, but of course your opinion is just as valid. And the question is, do you believe that people can do inner child work alone?
Okay. Honestly, I think that it's twofold. I think that you can do some work. I think that journaling, reading, getting yourself involved in a supportive community is possible to help heal and identify some things. But I think the inner work has to be done collectively, professionally, and also personally. I think that oftentimes when we identify like something is wrong, for most of us, we find spiritual guidance, which absolutely you should. And whether that is through our church, whether it's through our own time where we spend quiet time connecting with God and our roots and whatever our beliefs are. However, I think that when you identify that there is deep-rooted issues and wounds that need to be healed, counseling and therapy and going alongside someone who could actually walk you through that and kind of help that external support, I think is key to most healing. And so while, yes, you can do some work on your own, I think the deep-rooted work happens in a professional setting as well. Yeah.
Right.
And I definitely agree with Tasha from the standpoint that you have to deal with it in your quiet time alone. And I'll give you a good example. Before I guess, built up enough confidence to want to go to a counselor and get help, I had to do some work on myself, because if I would have stepped into that counseling environment first, where I'm still on the defensive, nothing that she was going to give me, I would have been receptive. So I had to kind of mold myself, do the work on my own. So when I did go into the counseling office, I'm in a much better headspace to receive what she's given.
Right. I tell people all the time, I would try everything I can on my own. But after I've gotten to the end of myself, I become the best student. I become the best student because I have tried everything that I know. There's nothing else I can do. So, yes, I am ready to learn. In fact, we have another comment. This is from Facebook. This is Dr. LaDonya Yvette. She says, it is so important to heal from your hurt because oftentimes hurt people hurt people. And that is so true.
I would just piggyback and say, heal people too.
Oh, now see that again, they applaud, because that is so, and that's honestly, in fact, one of the reasons why I started my own personal development journey. Because as I got to a certain level of freedom, I was like, who else can I help? I'm gonna share this quote, and then we have a question from online. But several years ago, I was at an event in Phoenix, Arizona, and I shared, in fact, with the attendees. I said, "Are you healed enough to help celebrate somebody else and help them glow?" And
Yeah.
I didn't say, are you completely healed? Are you all over your trauma? But are you healed enough to help
Hmm.
celebrate someone else? Because oftentimes you have individuals who are not, they are so hurt and so damaged that they don't see anybody else but themselves and but their own pain. And I know all of us, we're imperfect. All of us, we still have work that we have to do. But are we healed enough to clap for somebody else, to celebrate somebody else, to put them in, in the spotlight and to give them their just due? So you're absolutely right. Heal people, heal people.
Yeah, they do.
We have a question coming in here, and it is question for anyone on the panel. Why do you think some people refuse counseling?
You
I'm
want to
gonna
answer?
let y'all answer that.
I think I was telling Ron that he should answer it first because there was a point where he refused counseling, and so I don't want to speak for him as to why. I'll give my opinion why I think people refuse counseling. I don't think I was ever one who refused it, but I have been around people and I know people who refuse counseling. And I think a lot of times it starts with I'm not able to deal with that hurt or that wound. And I think one of the things that's important is when I've identified that first of all there is an issue. So sometimes we don't even want to identify that we have an issue. So that could be A. But then also I think that even if I've identified there's an issue, am I ready to deal with the issue? And I think we kind of went through that early on in our marriage. Like, not that Ron was oblivious to his issues. I don't think that he was ready to deal with them, but I'm going to let him speak into why he wasn't ready because no amount of me talking, no amount of me telling him what we needed to do made him go to counseling. It was absolutely a decision on his own.
And I think for me, it was more of a denial.
Mm,
I'll give you an example. In the professional world, you hear all these great things about you. Even from family members, you hear all these great things, all these accolades. But
right.
then when you look within your own household and things are not aligned, and Tasha is speaking to me about growth areas, it's like, okay, well, the world sees me here. But then you're saying that I got some growth issues in here. So it's like, no, I don't think anything's wrong with me. So I was in denial for a while until I did that work alone, until I got to a place to where, okay, Lord, I'm going into this counseling situation. Am I able to trust this person with the heavy baggage that I'm carrying? And then I think once I got through that first session and say, okay, this is somebody that I can trust, and she's giving me some tools to help, I was more likely and more willing to go to counseling and receive it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We do have a response from Facebook here, and it's my wife again. She says sometimes we feel justified in how and why we feel a certain way, and I
Absolutely.
can, and I can actually agree with that as well. But going back to what I was saying about sometimes we have to look past our own hurt. We have to be able to see if our hurt is hurting somebody else. Like you talked about being able to identify, being able to see. And for me, going back to the question, as far as, why is it so, and why do we think some people, in fact, refuse counseling? I honestly think that they can't see past their own hurt. Once you see the freedom that's
Mhm.
available to you on the other side of your healing, to me, that is the catalyst for I got to get over there. I got to get there. Okay, even if I got to go through this valley, I got to get to that mountaintop because I see the mountaintop, but I have to go through this valley to get there. But if all I'm doing is looking at the valley, if I'm looking at how dark it is, how scary it is, I don't want to go. If I don't look past it, and my thing is helping individuals understand that there's a level of freedom that comes from healing from those hurt things. We have another comment. That's good stuff. There's Infection Wonder Wilson. That's our goddaughters and godsons' mother. So good to have you on. Good to have you on. So yes, we definitely have, and again, this is another reason why I wanted to have these podcasts and have these conversations because so many people they they think about this stuff, but they don't want to talk about it. We don't talk about it at home. We don't talk about it at work. We don't talk about it, with our friends as we're hanging out. But I wanted to make sure that we had a platform and a safe space for us to bring up these conversations. And I want to thank those who have questions and who have been submitting them. And I'm glad what you said about how starting the inner child work, and I think it's so true. We can start it on our own, but if it's too heavy, we need help. It's
Mhm.
point blank. I used to give this example about, back when I was in college, it was so funny. It was so funny. Back when I first went to college, I would take a sheet, put it in the middle of the room, put all my stuff in it, tie the sheet up and put it in the trunk. It's the kitchen, it's the bedroom, it's the living room. Because I didn't have that much stuff.
Right.
I could put it in a sheet and put it in the trunk of my car and I could move. When I left college, I had to get a U-Haul because I had way too much stuff. And see, for us, when we are first starting off, we can do a certain level of work. But if we have too much baggage, if it's too weighted, if it's too damaging, if it's too hard, we need to get some help. If I'm moving a pencil, I don't need anybody. If I'm moving a piano, everybody I can get. And that's the way we need to look at ourselves when it comes to our mental health. So,
Totally.
next question is, how can someone help others who are struggling to identify the need for inner child work?
I think phase one would be a great listener. Because on the onset, if somebody is sharing their baggage with you, I think one of the worst things we can do is try to solve it at that moment, especially if we don't have influence over that person. So I think phase one would be listening first, recognizing what they've been through, and then saying, okay, do I have the skill set to offer help? And if I can't, then I can bring another brother or sister along to get involved in the situation to possibly help that person. But I think number one, we have to listen to see where the person is coming from first before we attempt to, put them in a position to help them heal.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think I would just say having compassionate conversations. You can't make someone want to heal or want to have a conversation, but you can open up a safe space for them to have it. And so having compassionate conversations, and I think about what that looks like from a leadership standpoint. I have conversations all the time with parents and teachers. Oftentimes I use storytelling. I tell my story in settings all the time because it opens up a safe space for someone to say, oh, okay, someone else has been through this too, or someone else can relate to what I've been in. Even if I can't relate, opening up just the door for someone to feel like I'm comfortable and I can trust someone, I really think opens up that door for people to be open and feel like I can share, or this is a safe environment for me to heal and work through that work.
So, in other words, having a certain level of vulnerability.
Absolutely.
Definitely. Okay. Okay. All right. Cool. So, the next question is, how can people start the conversation about inner child trauma, wounds, or healing?
And I feel like this one is one that we are gradually getting towards, but I would just say normalize it, normalize the conversation.
Right.
So often we don't have those conversations. Again, I would say from the communities that we come from, talking about our stories, talking about our hurt, talking about our trauma, talking about abuse, or in my case, talking about the death of my mom was such a hard space for my family for so many years to talk about because it left such a wound in so many people. And so for years, I think about my siblings and I, we went years not even knowing how my mom was killed because it was such a hard conversation. But what people didn't recognize, not having that conversation was leaving scars within us. And so we were dropping our baggage and our hurt and all of our unresolved childhood trauma on other people because no one was having those conversations. So I think it absolutely starts with not minimizing people's experiences, but having the conversation and normalizing. We talk about hard things.
Ron?
I think it starts with, I think you alluded to it, when we can see the freedom that it brings and knowing that good feeling, let's be bold enough to step out there and start that conversation. And I'll give you an example. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to have breakfast with some men from the life group. And probably 99% of the conversation may be geared towards sports. But it's like, how can we turn that conversation to talk about healing and trauma? And just based on the conversation that we're having tonight, I may need to jump out there and be the bold one just to be that spark. to create that safe space when we come together as brothers to talk more than just about sports or even marriage, but how are we hurting inside as men, and how can we circle around each other to lift each other up?
Right. I remember a good friend of mine, Dr. Charles Nett, we were having a conversation, and normally, people say, how you feeling? People say, but he changed, he said, what are you feeling? And that takes on a whole different dynamics, because it's not, because generally, that's like a physical, how are you feeling, as opposed to what are you feeling? And that is, again, a deeper level. We have a comment here from Facebook, Dr. Don. She says, even in the midst of your pain, it helps others who are suffering when you take the emotions out of it. So many people are so focused on being seen or being heard instead of seeking to understand first. And again, I think that goes back, to that whole statement about being healed enough, for us to be, to be in that place and in that space to where we can listen to someone else. We can step back. And, just a moment of transparency, I wasn't always there. And I have, especially through my own individual therapy and even with my couples therapy, I think that I'm getting better. I'm working in those areas. I'm actually implementing those actual skills. And I am seeing a difference in me and even in my approach. Although, old habits die hard, and Ron, he even talked about how, if you want to fix stuff and people come to you, that's our default. I want to fix it. But I'm having to learn how to die to that part of myself on a certain level, so that that's not my initial knee-jerk reaction. Because sometimes people don't need fixing. In fact, they just need a friend. And so I'm definitely working on that. And I think all of us, in fact, we need to do that. Now, listen, we are going to take another break. I have to actually have our sponsor come up again. But when we come back, we're going to have Ron and Tasha tell us how we can connect with them. And I also want them to talk about the books that they both wrote, their individual books. So we will talk about that in a second after our sponsor. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who is trained to listen and give you helpful, unbiased advice. First, you go to their site. You can use my link, betterhelp.com/SaconiPrinceHill. You answer a few questions, and BetterHelp will match you to a professional who's had years of experience helping people with struggles just like yours. You can do it all from your phone or your computer, via a phone call, a video chat, or messaging. However you feel most comfortable, it is the easiest possible way to start talking to a therapist. You'll be matched to a therapist usually within 48 hours, so you can get started fast. Let BetterHelp connect you to a therapist who can support you, all from the comfort of your own home. Visit betterhelp.com/SaconiPrinceHill or choose Saconi Prince Hill during your sign up and enjoy a special discount on your first month. And again, we want to thank BetterHelp for being a sponsor of this episode and of this podcast. And I wanted to take a moment to allow both of these amazing individuals to tell us about the individual books that they both wrote. So whoever wants to go first, I'm going to let y'all go.
I guess I'll go first. So I recently published a book. It is called Pieces of Me. Okay. It is available exclusively on Amazon, so you can get either a hard copy or a digital copy on Amazon. And so Pieces of Me is basically my life story. It is a story, my personal narrative of losing my mom at the age of 3. She was murdered by her brother. And the story of a grandmother stepping up in the midst of such a loss, literally losing both kids at one time, and then having to step in and raise her granddaughters. I have 2 older sisters. And so the story basically takes you just on this journey of dealing with loss, dealing with abandonment, dealing with family secrets, but also it honors my grandmother and her strength and her diligence and what it looks like to be a woman who can endure such pain and such trauma and still navigate the hardships of being a grandmother and raising someone else's children. And so I honor her in that. But my book is also for educators. It is for the educator who cannot understand the child who was me, the child who got into the classroom in the morning and was super angry, the child who walked in and had an attitude, the child who, if you looked at me wrong, I was going to have a smart mouth, but that mouth wasn't about you. That mouth was about the inner wounds that hadn't healed, but no one asked that question. I went to school for several years and no one knew. People knew I was raised by my grandmother, but they didn't know my story. Ask that child her story. Ask him his story. Get to know him in that inner space and build that relationship so that you can connect. The Pieces of Me is available on Amazon. You can get it there. There's some questions at the end for those of us who are still navigating hurt and abandonment. Just some questions at the end for you to kind of dive into and identify your own journey through healing. And so I love you guys to grab a copy.
Okay. And Ron, I know you got yours.
So back in September, I wrote my first book, Becoming the Principal I Never Had. And I did some thinking over the last 2 or 3 years. Why am I the type of principal I am? And when I did a deeper dive, I figured out I didn't know a single principal growing up, from elementary school to middle school to high school, because honestly, if you were not a troubled kid, the principal gave you no attention. I was that middle of the road kid. I went to school, I was compliant, did everything that they asked me to do, but I didn't have a single interaction with a principal. I'll give you an example. At the high school level, the first time I actually interacted with my high school principal was at graduation when I was walking across the stage.
Wow.
So that led me to write the book on, to leaders, to teachers, on building positive relationships with kids. There are days where I can walk down the hallway now to where, sometimes I tell my wife I feel like a superstar. And that's basically because I build positive relationships with kids, from the high fives to the pound. It may be a day that you need a hug. I'm in the carpool line, opening doors, just greeting kids, creating those safe spaces, because as a kid, I didn't get that. So I said, when I got into this leadership role in education, I wanted to make sure that, the kids remember me and those lessons that I teach every single day. Similar to Tasha, you can pick up my book on Amazon.com. It's in the form of Kindle, in addition to paperback. And what she didn't say, we've done individual books, but how powerful will it be as we work on one as a couple? We're not going to tell you the title yet, but it's actually in the works, coming to you soon.
Okay, all right, cool. Listen, when you two get that done, you can come back on here, because I'm sure that there's something on it or in it that's going to help our audience and help everybody get to a better place. Well, with that being said, listen, I want to thank everybody for tuning in to our H.E.A.L podcast. I want to thank our special guests today, Ron and Tasha Anthony, and I want to thank you again for the amount of passion that you have and your commitment to not only bettering yourselves, but bettering our community. And with that being said, I can't close out without letting everybody know, those who are listening and those who are tuning in, that I also do motivational speaking, just in case you didn't know. Yes, I know the whole inner child stuff is all cool, but I started off doing personal development and leadership development. And I want to end the show with my sizzle reel. Well, my name is Saccone Prince of SacconePrince.com, where we make motivation personal by introducing you to yourself. I'm a motivational speaker, a trainer, and a coach. I'm also an author. I help people in the area of personal development and leadership development, because I believe that you can't lead others until you learn how to lead yourself. But once you learn how to lead yourself, the next logical step is that you lead other people.
Saccone Prince is the best keynote I've ever seen.
He really encouraged me so much.
He has this ability of seeing in people what they don't see in themselves.
He was so confident. When he was coming to the stage, you could see like, wow, this is a lion.
Any actor that's going for a role, they do a case study. If I'm going to be a fry cook, I go to a restaurant and watch people that are fry cooks. If I'm going to be a mob boss, I go and, well, maybe not go to with a mob, but you take some notes as to what they do. Our children are watching us. What can they reference when they step into our shoes? I do what I do because I believe that people have truly yet to understand their purpose. Once you know who you are, nothing can stop you. But until you know who you are, anything can. So my goal is to really help people to understand their purpose and their calling, And oftentimes they have the answers themselves, but they're not asking the right questions. So I help people to get to that place to where they look at themselves, they step back and they see how they've been a help to those around them and what really drives them. And from that, they really understand the value of it. They learn to value their value and see what value their value brings. Because a lot of people, they have yet to do that. Until you know who you are, anything can stop you. But once you know who you are, nothing can stop you. I want you to understand that you are blessed. That you are blessed to be a blessing. That there is somebody looking up to you. They're looking at you. Don't ever forget that. Because if you ever do, you're going to leave them without a mind.
I've learned so much, and I've experienced a lot of interactions with people.
The practical approach, like you can't just sit down there, you have to walk up to an opportunity. Sometimes you have to grab the opportunity. Sometimes you have to fight for the opportunity. There's so much life lessons.
I think from today onwards, I'll stretch out and reach to higher levels.